some of what I'm going to start with is reiterating what Madam Ambassador has said, and that is that, you know, women have been involved within the built environment for hundreds of years. In the UK, we know that Lady Elizabeth Wilbraham, Marion Mahoney Griffin, and Elizabeth Scott, who graduated from the AA in 1924, have all been pushing the boundaries for women's involvement within architecture and design. So that's almost 100 years now. The irony, I think, is that women aged 21 and over had to wait until 1928 to get the vote in Great Britain. I think that is ironic. But personally, as an Indian woman who's passionate about the progression of young talent, I believe we all have a responsibility to educate, challenge, support, and teach our future generations, be they scientists, architects, financiers, or designers. But today, I feel even more so that we have to push our female architects and designers to be the very best that they can be. And that often requires fight and determination in bucket loads. I know my own journey in the world of construction hasn't always been easy, kind, or supportive. And I also know from personal experience that the power of just one individual to kick you down is an incredible thing. But the power of an individual to lift you up is something really, truly amazing. Today, to reiterate, women make up a quarter of registered architects in the UK and are increasingly well represented in the top 100 UK architectural offices, accounting for 2,427, that's 35% of all architects within the cohort. And that's 3.6% increase from 2019. This suggests that larger practices are now significantly more likely to employ women. In Sweden, women dominate the architectural education programmes. For example, over 60% of students in Chalmers' 5-year architectural programme are women. At the same time, in the landscape architect programme, the proportion of women is around 80%. Increasing the number of women in senior management is, I believe, key to achieving change. So on our panel today, we have 4 fantastic women. We have Emilia Kovacic, City Architect at Karlshamn Municipality, Chair of the Industry Organisation Architects Sweden. We have Katja Tolmer-Grillner, KTH School of Architecture. Barbara Campbell-Lang, Deputy Director, Bartlett School of Architecture, UCL panellist. And last but absolutely not least, we have Catherine Pease, co-founder of VPPR Architects. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think this is going to be really exciting, and I'm dead keen to hear what you've all got to say. So to kick off, Katja and Barbara, many women go into the architecture programmes. Almost half of those are female, but then don't go on to practice, don't go into architectural practice afterwards. And I'm really interested to hear what you both think is the reason behind this.
Katja, do you want to go first on this?
Yeah, I could. Of course. Thank you very much. It's fantastic to be here. That question is a little bit special to take in Sweden, because I don't think that is actually the case here, because we have around 60% women practicing, and seeing the figures of women coming from the education, I don't think we don't have that situation here that I think you have in the UK with kind of dropout. But it doesn't mean that it's not a relevant question at all. But I think the difference here is, like in Sweden for a long time, there are studies also showing that there isn't that kind of general choice between sort of career and family taking place because of our parental leave situation. That it's since 1974 we don't have a maternity leave, we have a parental leave, which is also quite generous, and a good daycare situation. So we don't have that situation. It doesn't mean that when you scratch on the surface there aren't many more issues around sort of practicing architecture as a woman, but but we don't have that situation. But on the other hand, I mean, one interesting thing that I notice, if I think more personally, we also have had a very good job situation in architecture. We haven't really had a real crisis since the mid-90s. Of course, now it's a little bit different with the pandemic, but there hasn't been a real drop in jobs. But in the mid-90s, there was such a situation, and that's also when I graduated from architecture school. And it's interesting to note that we have, in my generation, we also have a very strong academic generation around of women architects. And I don't think that is coincidental, that there are, when it's very, very challenging, there is also academic career opportunities that come up. And among our faculty, we have a majority of women now from that generation. Coming into an academic career path, and I think we can see that. I haven't seen studies, but I think we can see that internationally as well. That you sometimes have very strong women generations in academia, and that can be a sign of like what kind of career is possible at certain moments when times are also very tricky. But Barbara, you could maybe respond more to the UK situation.
Thanks, Katja. What would I say? Well, I think it's perhaps a question of category and a question of measurement, how we measure things. Because in my opinion, I think women are practicing architecture. However, they are evolving what I would call non-traditional forms of design practice. So the ways of working with the built and natural environment and people are ones that don't necessarily fit easily or neatly into traditional or easily measurable categories. And I suppose something that interests me a great deal, and I think we'll touch on with Govinda as we develop this conversation, is the question of the pipeline, how we bring people into the study of architecture, and also how we evolve them and connect with them and embrace them as they evolve their careers post education. But I think there is a really important question here about the term architecture itself, the capital A.
Yeah.
Most of the world talks and understands architecture as buildings. So I'm really interested, I suppose, in everyday buildings. I'm interested in sheds. I'm interested in things that aren't necessarily glamorous or monumental. And I think this is all part of what I would almost call the EDI, the equity or equality, inclusion and diversity of the subject itself. And I think this is something we can talk and evolve together.
No, I think that's, I completely agree. I think it's very, very important, like to see what is behind these statistics and to understand what categorizes as architect or as architectural career. One very important book for me early was Francesca Hughes, The Architect Reconstructing Her Practice, in which she invited a wide range of women to talk about their practice and really showing the kind of breadth of architecture practices. So if you expand, you also get other numbers, of course, and that's very important.
I think just sort of touching on that diversity, I think it'd be very interesting for both our countries, Sweden and the UK, to be interrogating primary and secondary school education and what is measured and how children are maybe inadvertently categorized before they've evolved very far into sort of types. Because in my experience, many of our students have arrived in the study of architecture almost accidentally because they were pushed towards art, because they weren't, in inverted commas, clever. And that was because their skills, their qualities weren't measurable in any conventional way in primary and secondary education. And we've been lucky enough to have them and evolve them. And what I think architectural education needs to convey much more inventively or widely is that we are teaching design, which is a form of critical thinking in many areas. We are teaching people to be able to speak the languages of many disciplines and how to bring those together. And there's one thing that the Department of Trade and Industry could really benefit from going forward, it's investment in design. I believe design is what we need to bring all our disciplines together. And architecture as an education, design education is a way of doing that.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. I mean, in reality, design is involved in everything we do, isn't it? Scientists, everything. Absolutely. That's really, really interesting to hear, actually, because it's not, I think, what a lot of people think of when they sort of put that question out. Catherine, I'd like to bring you in to the conversation here, if I may, because there was something you said yesterday that really piqued my interest when we had our pre-meet about your experiences to do with your peer group, very much about women studying architecture, but then not necessarily moving forward in that. And I wonder, is there a situation where women have to navigate difficult choices for their careers and make potentially sacrifices? I'm really keen for you to share your story, because I was fascinated to hear that yesterday. But if you could also pick up, this idea, do you think that we have to make sacrifices in order to progress a career in architecture?
Yeah, well, to a degree, I think both men and women, in order to create great design and great buildings, have to make certain amounts of sacrifices, because the fact is that it's a degree with many years of study. You start your career doing throughout your career, you do very long hours, and the pay isn't great, and it's the reality of the profession, but we do it because we love it. And it's something that obviously impacts men and women to a certain degree, but ultimately I think women are still confronted by expectations and structures that make it really difficult to sort of pursue a career, the traditional career of an architect, especially as building projects take many years. And I mean, ultimately, the UK is a society where women are very much still the primary caregiver when they have children. And it's not only, I mean, there's an expectation, but also this is created by the structure of the welfare system. So for example, I mean, paternity leave is 2 weeks, paid maternity leave is 52 weeks. But when I say paid, this is probably, you'll be lucky if you sort of get 25% of your salary. And then this continues. So there's very little supported childcare until a child reaches the age of 3, when you then have 30 hours free childcare. But just the sort of cherry on top is that, well, so a London parent will be paying £15,000 to £20,000 in full-time childcare up till the age of 3, which, often you question whether it is worth going back to work. But the cherry on top is that the childcare is taxed on top of that. So you're sort of being taxed for having childcare, which is kind of ridiculous. And then, obviously it's exacerbated at the moment with COVID, and, it's affecting both parents, but you hear that, the impact is greatest on women. So really there's this care gap in the system, and it becomes a care trap for women. So, it's so important that we start addressing the issues surrounded by equal paternity and maternity leave, which I know the Swedish society has a much better system for. So I'm actually really interested to hear from Amina and Katya how it works for them.
Yeah, I mean, before that's fascinating, actually, because our conversation yesterday touched on something slightly different, in that you had friends who you mentioned had studied architecture, but then gone on to do other pursuits. And is that really because of all that you've just talked about, then, really, because of those imbalances?
Well, I think it's what Barbara mentioned, is that architecture in the UK is seen as much sort of broader sort of subject. So you don't necessarily do architecture to become the sort of traditional architect. And I have so many friends who are artists and filmmakers, and at the top of their career, and sort of very incredibly talented and incredibly successful. And I think actually the architecture degree opens a lot of doors, and I think in the UK certainly it's compared to other countries perhaps it's seen much more as a sort of starting point in a sort of creative career that's sort of as was said earlier, design is a very wide subject, and architecture degree covers all those things.
Amina, what's the situation in your experience?
Besides being a woman in architecture, I'm also very familiar with what it's like being a foreigner in Sweden, with no connections within the field, the struggle of studying on foreign language, getting that very first and important internship and the first job, but also creating a family with no support, no parents or sister or someone to rely on beside yourself. So I think what was sacrifice on my part, it's mostly that the length of our training. Most all architects tend to have children relatively late, so we are kind of delaying parenthood, and that maybe is that sacrifice. At least it was for me. But when we decided that we want to have family, it was quite easy in Sweden because there is fantastic child support system and reform that Katja mentioned before, that allows us to both work and make a career and be a good moms and parents. So 10 years ago, probably derogatory comments were made about men taking paternity leave, implying that women should take the burden. But that's really not the case today, because shared paternity leave is a standard, and it's the most important thing happened in Sweden, in my opinion. So that means that today there are many women in forefront of city planning. Like 13 years ago, when I became a city architect, it was mostly male. I had mostly male counterparts. Today, I think there are mostly women working at the post, like such as mine. So we moved quite a bit in Sweden, and I'm not sure what it's like in other professions, but I feel that we made a very large step, and. Maybe things that you can see in Sweden is that as you grow further up the ranks, it gets more and more unequal.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, it's like because career development of women is the key to changing the culture and practice. So as long as we cannot reach as high up as we should, there is something for us to do. And making possible for more women to make an entry in the decision-making roles, both as a politician, as a city architect or whatever. I think, or as associates and partners, so in a kind of firm. I think we have more to do at that point, but otherwise, I think it was very easy, because it was never the question if my husband was about to go on paternity leave. It was just a normal thing to do. So I was very glad, because it's not like that in Sarajevo when I come from, and my friends back there, they are just quite in shock. And I think Sarajevo had a very huge thing about the Swedish man taking paternity leave. It's like I think it's very famous all over the world, as it seems.
It is. I mean, it's actually a question I was going to ask later on, but I think I'm interested now we've started talking about it. I think this is fascinating, because we in the UK, we believe that you have this amazing situation of support for childcare, which facilitates your careers, and I'm fascinated to hear that is your experience, Mina. And Katja, is that the same for you? Have you found it really supportive?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, in terms of those basic, the basic situation with the shared parental leave, which we also in my family, I mean, we did the same. We shared our parental leave equally, and that of course gives you possibility to maintain throughout. Like when your children is small, you also still have your foot in the workplace, which I think is all very, very good. Then, of course, as everywhere, you know, it is a big challenge with that comes with when your child is sick, they cannot be at the childcare and so forth. So we all have, of course, these challenges with young families and combining with career, and also in Sweden. I mean, there are studies showing that because of our generous leaves, and even though a lot of fathers do take the responsibility, I mean, we can still see that the bigger responsibility lies on the women in general if we look at statistics. And also you can see that also this generous parental leave also gives women kind of lags behind in terms of salary, in terms of career opportunities. So there is like one can also show in different ways the backside of it in terms of pushing women back. So there are always different sides of the whole.
So it's almost like you get that benefit, but without but the salary doesn't match.
No, exactly, because you lag behind. Because if we just talk statistically, women do take much more responsibility, even if you have equal rights to take it. So still there are lots of things when you scratch beneath the surface that you see, and that where you can see some in countries where you would think there's worse, there are not as good opportunities, maybe women careers are better. So
yeah.
So it's a very complex thing. But the situation, of course, is, I mean, I was understanding that we had shared parental leave since 1974, and that it's not at all the case in other countries or in the UK. I mean, for me, it's like baffling from the other side to understand that it can be that you don't have a right as a father to have this leave. It's it's very strange.
Yeah, I mean, it's improving in the UK, but it's not quite where you guys are. We're definitely envious, I think. Brilliant. I mean, it's really fascinating, and I'm quite envious of what you have there. I'm sure Barbara and Catherine are a little bit too. It's a struggle, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So there's a sort of question that I want to put out there, and I think if we start with Catherine and Amina, but I'm really keen to hear everybody's sort of ideas around this one, because I think this is really fascinating. I mean, obviously this is all really brilliant, but gender parity and racial equity, you know, I'm curious, would you say these are a challenge within architecture or you know, amongst practicing architects? And if so, what I'm keen to understand is what diversity initiatives your organisation or that you're seeing being implemented are happening to address these issues, both on the gender issues and the underrepresentation of minorities. Amina?
But I don't know. As I have to say at first that I have been the president of Architects Sweden for just a month now, so you have to take that I don't have any all of the figures, but I think that what we see in Sweden, if we take gender parity, that the most typical member of Architects Sweden is a woman. She's an architect employed in private sector. She's from Stockholm, and some would say living in Söder, which is a hipster part of Stockholm, but I would not get that far. But I don't think that we have that kind of gap, whether it's a pay gap between men and women in architecture in Sweden. I think we are one of the most equal professions in general, but what we can see in Sweden is a higher unemployment rate among foreign-born architects. And they also learn less if they manage to get a job, according to our statistics. So the language barrier can be one reason why it is difficult finding a job in Sweden, but and that is something that we need to address. So as I can recall it anyway, we don't talk that much about racial equity, but at Architect Sweden, we are currently working on raising awareness on the level of knowledge concerning gender equality in general and diversity issues within our field. And we're doing that by implementing a policy that we made by a special committee in Architect Sweden. However, we want this policy to be the standard in every single practice, how small it may be. And it's going to be a long journey, because we know that there are some injustices, mostly for the people, foreign-born architects. And I know that several different initiatives have been done during the past few years. Like when we got a lot of people from Syria moved to Sweden at the time when there was a war in Syria, and suddenly we were organizing language courses. Many private practices were offering internships and so on, but it's not enough. We have to work more just to raise awareness of these issues. I don't know if it was an answer.
That is, it's fascinating. It's fascinating. Yeah, no, that is really interesting. And Catherine, you run a practice with other women, so I'm curious to hear your experiences around this.
Yeah, well, yeah. So sort of going back to sort of bigger inequality, I do think it's a challenge, whether it's gender or race or class, and I mean this is why we have this debate, and we need to really continue to have it. So I'm very glad you raised the question, and I think the greatest loss to architecture is if so long as there's inequality within the profession, there's a huge gap in the pool of amazing talent that's getting lost along the way. So actually, to really address it will really, benefit the profession as a whole. So for us, it's gender is something that comes up a lot for us at BPR, in that we are 12 women and 1 man in our practice. So for us, we have every week we receive a huge amount of CVs from women, from very talented architects, and that's why we've ended up with a team like that. We haven't done it deliberately. We never set out, as we're 3 female directors and co-founders who set up practice, and we never sort of set out saying, oh, we're just going to employ women. But it happened like that. And what's interesting is that I have a lot of, I've had sort of friends of mine mention who work in very male practices and with male directors and senior teams saying, oh, we never get, very many CVs from women, and why is that? And we'd love to employ more women, but we don't get the CVs, and as a result we just get more men. Yeah. So I mean what I think is really important in this discussion is that the reason we get women is that what I hope is that people not only like our work, but they deliberately apply to us because they want to work with senior women and female teams. And so actually, if you apply those sort of rules, and if you have sort of more mix at the top of companies and directors and senior teams, then whether it's race, class, or gender, hopefully that would encourage more people applying and younger recruits of greater diversity. And I think that's how the change is really going to happen. And I think that's what you mentioned at the beginning, Linda, as well. That actually it comes from the top change, and by putting a diversity at the top in practices will encourage more diversity within the practice as a whole.
Yeah, that's lovely. I mean, it's interesting because I was actually going to say to you, do you think that's the reason that you get more female applicants because it's run by women. Brilliant. Yeah. Really enjoyed that. Katja, I understand you also have been involved in some research to do with exactly this subject. So I'd love to hear about that, if you could share that.
Yes, no, I could say a few words about that. In our at KTH, at the architecture school, we have I would say since 2007 we started this initiative. Me and a number of colleagues, we started a feminist architecture educators group called Fatal, and we were in different ways in the positions that we could, we could start new courses. We could also start to apply for research grants. We could eventually start a design studio. So in different ways we could kind of work our way into the curriculum. So it was an inside job, but also sort of getting into it. And with that, we have been, I would say, managing to kind of build up and establish our institution as sort of one of. We have several really great sort of colleagues internationally around the world, but of course, like we are one of the institutions that have pushed architecture and feminism quite hard. There's lots of publications coming out. We had the first, the UK-based ARA, Architecture and Humanities Research Association, you had your first sort of out of the UK meeting in Sweden in 2016 on architecture and feminism. So we were very, very proud to host that. But that's in some way we have pushed both the research side and maybe kind of feminist theory side into architecture, into our school and into the curriculum, which means I also lecture in the first year and giving them these things from the start in some way. But we've also had in parallel with our head of education has pushed a very broad gender equality work in the school from sort of in parallel to our efforts, which means that we have also, and that was also a big student initiatives, maybe 10 years ago starting that, which means that, we have actually established rules, very sort of clear rules on always thinking 50-50 in terms of like what sources do we refer to in our lectures, how do the critics panel look, if there's an event hosted at the architecture school, how is the, what guests are there, and so forth. So there's a very active way of always kind of checking what we're doing. It doesn't mean that there aren't lots of things happening where it isn't, equal in the end, and so. But we are sort of pushing a very general awareness, and also also having sort of teaching for the teachers to become aware. So I would say in that way we have worked very much with kind of inclusiveness and gender equality. But I could also say that we have not. We have not come equally far in talking about discrimination and in terms of kind of anti-racist discourse or normative whiteness, and so on. I think we have a lot of work to do there as well. But at the same time, also from the feminist theory, we also get a lot of tools to work and understand and work our way around understanding the problems around sort of the normative situation in which, and because it's the same in Sweden as it is elsewhere, that we have a very that architecture as a profession is a very kind of heritage profession where you have a lot of you have like a normative whiteness and also class issues, as we know in the architecture. So we have to work with this actively. We also did have a sort of pre-training architecture school out in one of the suburbs in Stockholm for a couple of years in Tensta Architecture School that we run. So we have taken some initiatives, but I would say that if you would be self-conscious, self-critical, we also need to kind of start to look at what we've done in terms of gender equality and feminism, and also move towards more awareness in terms of more anti-discrimination.
If I could pick up on Katya's point there, Govinda, I just
Yes, please.
I totally support what Katya and had said there. Just at the Bartlett School of Architecture, I think likewise we are paying enormous attention to gender and race issues, and particularly I think there's a very conscious effort in our care of the use of language. The choice of words that are being used, the way we speak to colleagues and students. I would say we are, as a whole school, and I mean that in the most inclusive way, and I would also extend that to our relationship with the faculty of the Bartlett, which includes project construction, management, planning, and other areas, that we are very sensitive to the issue of unconscious bias. And I would say that extends across the entire faculty, not just in our School of Architecture. And we are using role models more and more to inspire our future students and future tutors and future practitioners. So our students are currently interviewing a huge and vast range of our alumni on a new series called What I Did Next, which is fascinating. It's wonderfully imperfect, but in a way that's its value. It's getting to hear a huge breadth of voices. And I think in some ways the pandemic and the fact that we are all online now and we are all in each other's homes has offered an incredible insight and increased awareness of the difference of our situations and how we're working together. So diversity and our sensitivity to it is, I think, now probably heightened like never before in a really good way. Just one last point in terms of increasing diversity and access. We at the Bartlett School of Architecture are working unbelievably hard to increase the numbers of scholarships, to make education affordable and accessible to all people from non-traditional backgrounds. And I would say that it is my sense that in Europe or across Europe, and I would need to be corrected on this, education is still largely funded by the state, by the governments, whereas in the UK it's become very expensive. So there is discrimination, financial impediment to many, many people who I think would undoubtedly contribute to making the built environment a better place.
I guess we have still free education, but the threshold, of course, to get into the architecture school is very high, where part of it is on tests, and then of course there's all issues around how you get access to the sort of cultural know-how of how to get into all those. So there's a lot of things to really consider in how to increase the possibility to kind of get across the thresholds.
So to open up the access,
so
that people know it's there and how to get to it. It's really interesting that both of you picked up on this idea of the conscious choice of language, and it's inbred in us from a very young age, and so having to retrain yourself through the process it's fascinating, because it's things we all take for granted, isn't it, a lot of the time. Really interesting. So actually something, Barbara, you touched on when you were chatting earlier, and you mentioned sort of role models. Now I think this is really a really sort of pertinent, very topical thing at the moment, because I know certainly you tune on to the news and what have you, and you listen to a podcast or whatever, and somebody's always talking about mentoring, that especially through COVID-19 we have a situation where we have a generation that are just not getting the nurturing through practice because we're all sitting in our homes. And so I'm curious, what do you feel is the importance of role models? Because you touched on that as well, didn't you? And how has that inspired you, your career? I'm really fascinated to know who inspired you to become the person that you are today, and what that did for your future, you know, when they did inspire you.
Gosh, Govinda, it's a huge question. I would say I've been given the benefit of the doubt and encouragement all my life from very, very many different people, men, women, you know, absolutely I think even dead people on Wikipedia that you read about and you think, gosh, I'd have loved to have had a conversation with that person, or, you know, the point at which somebody's experiment or project failed and then somehow they took strength from something else. So my thought on role models is that one puts together a role model from many different people. It's not one single person. I'm really increasingly doubtful about terms like top or center. I'm much more interested in inventing, let's say, almost to use a Gambon's phrase, which is community without community. It's a community of differences and an enjoyment of that. So, but if I had to choose one person that had really helped me at a critical point, was when I was 22, I had the opportunity to work in a practice, and that entire opportunity, and indeed the sort of shift in my education from that point on, was made possible by the architect and RIBA gold medalist Patty Hopkins, the wife of Michael Hopkins, and she very subtly and very indirectly made an enormous difference to me. So that's who I would cite.
I love your mixed bag person. I think they're brilliant, and we should all have one. Amina, how about you?
There are many role models, exactly as we heard before. But if I take the personal level first, it should be my mother, and I think it's like she taught me at very early age a very important thing, that it is that privilege is often invisible to those who have it. And that simple meaning meant it was very special to me, because I remind myself when I experienced injustice of some kind, I think what you wanted to say to me is that people are not unfair on purpose. They are just not aware of their behavior, and that it is very important for me to make it visible for them. And it may sound naive, but the simple meaning has helped me thousands of times, because not judging people who are judging you, whatever the reason, gives you an advantage and a clear picture and great opportunity to change things for the better, because it keeps your mind open and free, and it gives you also strength and courage to react. And I think in a way it's not only our right to react while experiencing injustices or some kind, it's our duty to do so. And I think my mother was very good at explaining things in very simple way. But talking about professional role models, there are many different women and men. I think Jane Jacobs, as I work as an urbanist, I think she wasn't an architect, a trained architect, but she did tremendous things at the time where women were not allowed to think as much as she did. I think of a woman named Hanna Viktorsson. She was also an architect in Karlshamn, born in 1926. She realized plenty of buildings, 50 or 60 buildings here in this little town. And being a woman at that time wasn't as easy as it is today. Right. We had some great women in Sweden, like Petra Gipp. She works with both art and architecture. Carmen Izquierdo, who got the Casper Salin Prize in Sweden. Emma Junsteg was a very important role model for many architects, both male and female. She tragically passed away last year and was very missed, but there are plenty of women, so I think I'll stop here.
Thank you. I'd love to hear, Catherine, your your role model next, if
Yeah,
that's
well,
okay.
I've got lots, like with everyone else, but there's one in particular, and I feel very happy to be on this panel because I feel like I've come full circle. But my first age 21, as a young 21-year-old, I got this job for a practice called Dive Architects, which is led by Ia Yara, and at the time the practice was based in London, and Ia is a Swedish architect. And she really showed me, she was so passionate, sort of super talented and very determined, even more determined when a contractor says no. And I just having a sort of such a strong female boss at such a young age sort of made me realize that, it's really possible to have your own business, be an architect. And I think also what was really important was that she was juggling a young family at the time with her partner, both a business partner and also her husband, Andy Nettleton. And just seeing the two of them both sort of discuss design and great ideas and the sort of passion in practice, but also seeing them negotiate who's going to pick up the kids from nursery or school made me realize that it's really important to have both a sort of balanced partnership, both in work but also in life. And really, as women and as a family, that's what you need to succeed. So there's sort of those. Ia was really my sort of early influence, but I think my greatest influence are my two business partners, Jessica Reynolds and Tatiana von Preussen, who I met aged 18 on our first day of university. And, again, it's about partnership, but I think that, just being able to work every day with sort of such passionate, talented business partners is an incredible privilege. And it's really special. So.
Wow, that's so lovely. That's so lovely. Oh, you made me all fuzzy. No, it's special. It is special for sure. And Katia.
Yes. Sorry. Yeah.
No.
I mean, I completely listen in to all accounts here of role models, and it's a very complex thing to respond to. And as Barbara said, I think also there is a whole, like, if one tries to start to reflect on this really and build, it's like a whole mosaic of role models, of course.
Yeah.
I was also, I mean, in some way in my career, if I think back kind of career-wise and career step-wise, I had the kind of obvious, a lot of like really good and generous, obvious mentors who were also male, of course, and kind of giving me these opportunities and trusting me and so forth. I was I was lucky in that way. I would say, reflecting on this also, that in some way it took me, it perhaps, like, it's interesting to see, like, when do you recognize and understand all the women mentors that you have, and how do you, like, when do you see that? And if I'm a bit personal here, I would say that I had there are different stories, I think, or different ways of kind of coming into insights in terms of gender and so. And I was in some way coming a little bit late into this. I was living in this kind of bubble of confidence or and it was sort of in the mid-late architecture school when suddenly I had this kind of strange situation where you have an old male critic criticizing your work, or actually liking my work, but in a completely inappropriate way, talking about its feminine qualities and like going off on track. And I was quite sort of naive and innocent and didn't really understand what was happening. But there I had this older student, women student friends who suddenly just stepped in and were so strong in articulating how this was like completely like over the top wrong, and really telling off both the old male critic and the younger male teacher in a way that I mean, it was really interesting because I was completely both saved in some way by their intervention, but also opening my eyes to what's happening, what am I being subjected to, what am my colleagues being subjected to. But I also think that kind of story is important in terms of how you then start to also see your both women, your peers, your mentors. You start to identify what you learn from them, maybe in a different way than these kind of obvious, really nice, trusting men that were helping you. So you start to see a lot of different things. So I would say from then maybe I started to see my teachers, other teachers a bit more to understand what they were giving, but then also in my academic career, find my older colleagues have been super important for me, kind of recognizing and both sharing, I would say sharing between generations then a lot of experience. So it's an important question, and really it's really nice to think about as well. You start to kind of collect this warm mosaic bag.
It is warm, and I think it's really interesting that, you know, it doesn't have to be, there's this impression that your mentor has to be somebody senior or whatever, but actually your colleagues, your equals, your contemporaries can also be your mentors. And I think that's a really lovely thing to share with the people listening in. Now, before we move on, I've got one last question before we move on to Q&A. And what I'd really like to do, I just want this to be some fun and some sort of obviously serious in between. But if you met your younger self in a pub, you're on your first drink, okay, so you've got some semblance of sense in you, and you met your younger self, what would you tell them? What would you share? Can we start actually with this one? Can I start with Amina, please?
Yes. It was interesting question. I think I would say to myself that have even more fun would be the first thing, and then I will try to remind myself of how important it is to choose your partner very, very carefully, because I find one who will support your career, and because equality always starts within your own family. So that's what I would say to myself.
Fab. Barbara, let's hear your DIT.
What would I say? What I would say to younger than me architects starting out or thinking about moving into the fields of design is trust your instincts, never give up, and keep a sense of humour.
Too true. Katja.
Well, I think if I were to meet my sort of 20-year-old self, if we go so far back to the just having begun architecture school self, I think I would like to maybe help her to open her eyes a little bit more to these games that are going around her, not just for protection or so, but also to actually start what I already said earlier, to really start to see what's happening around, just see your peers, see your older colleagues, and to reach out more and support and allow yourself to be supported by other women. I think that's what, if I'm thinking of what I would tell, that would be kind of to earlier open the eyes to that, even though actually I did open my eyes pretty early to that, but still it's something that I think, you know, with these 30 years after, there is something that you can kind of feedback in that way, that could be good. See a little bit more of what's happening around, perhaps.
Yeah, streetwise. Catherine, what would be your?
Well, first enjoy the pub while you can. Seems rather deprived of it at the moment. And then what I would say is sort of be confident and never be afraid to ask. I feel like the more you ask, the more you'll get. And there's lots of people who will support you support you and give you advice. And we've all been there.
Fantastic. Well, it's all good advice that you're giving yourselves and everybody watching. Thank you so much. This has been fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Now, I have got some Q&A. So if I start with the first question, and we've probably got time actually for everybody to have a little bit of a input, which is brilliant. So the first question that's come in from the viewers, I like to put it like that, it's like we're on TV. I'm wondering if any of you have experienced discrimination or being treated differently based on your gender at work. And if so, how are you able to handle such a situation?
I can start. At one of my jobs, one of my bosses was about to give me a half of a raise as he offered my male counterpart, but he didn't know that I rang a human resource department because we are allowed to do it. And it is an open information, and I found out what my male counterpart get in the salary. So when I got his proposal, I was like taking a few steps back, wondering what should I do, and then I just thought of reminding him of that he himself has 2 daughters. One of them was studying at Chalmers University. She was about to get her first job. So I just asked him kindly and politely if he wants to be a kind of a man who create that kind of future for his daughters. And he just blushed. It became an awkward situation, and she just said to me that he would speak to the human resource department because it must have been something wrong there. So I got as much salary as my male counterpart, and it wasn't the most important thing. The most important thing was that a few months later, the municipality took a decision that every single person taking upon that kind of responsibility should get a certain amount of money. It should be same for both men and women. So I just felt, yes.
Well done. Well done. That's brilliant. Has anybody else got experiences on this?
I mean,
Katja.
yes, I mean, it can be at different levels that you have experiences, like the kind of explicit one that Amina told us, but it can also be things like when you get an evaluation from a research council where you become the young and talented woman compared to the more experienced blah 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 men who are like actually just kind of 3 years older or something like that, and you kind of you understand how first it might be flattering, but then when you read what it really says, it's like a very clear like gender distinction there, where a lot is kind of read into the gender. So I could be young and talented. But then also what I already referred to, this situation in the crit, which was my kind of first experience, maybe first because that's when my older friends actually identified the situation to me, so I understood what was happening when this critic was talking about my project as a feminine, blah, blah, blah. It was like completely running off into how it, anyway, I shouldn't go into it, but it was too much. But to see, so what do you do about it was the question. And then I think I was kind of showed by my friend what you do about it is that you have to understand that it's happening and also be able to talk back. And then if you're lucky, you have other peers there who are actually in a meeting, for example, who are able to identify what's happening and saying it there. And that's the best thing. Or like Amina, what you said, to actually confront and say, well, this is happening, this is not fair. So to try that, but it's not easy. It's extremely, and sometimes it's really not easy to do that in the situation.
Yeah.
I think just to add to both Amina and Katja, I think sometimes, and this is a very practical observation really, but sometimes in meetings it's actually quite hard to enter a discussion because of volumes of voices. And I think as a woman or as a participant in a meeting, to invite the quieter people to speak, almost actively invite them into the conversation, is a really important gesture that I think actually really does work. But I think there are many people with viewpoints who feel for different reasons that they're not heard. And I think that's what we can collectively do to enrich the ways we make decisions going forward.
Interesting. Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm glad. That's a really interesting question. Thank you. We've got a couple more questions, but we're running short of time, so I'm just going to put one more out there and see how we get on. Jennifer, you tell me if we have to stop quickly. But second question that's come in is, what do you think we can gain by bringing more women into the field? Is it only for equality, or do you think we, as women, can bring together and bring another perspective to the practice? There is a lot of talk about city planning, for instance, and how women can add more equity to the city as a whole. I have to be really quick. Who'd like to take this one? Catherine, do you want to speak?
Well, I mean, we all know that cities were designed by men for men. It's sort of historically, so certainly having more women and knowing what it's like to drag a buggy up the sort of 10 flights of stairs up to the train is important. And I mean, I just think ultimately by not having, there's such a talent of women out there. And by not, as I said earlier, by narrowing the pool and not having not allowing women into the profession because of societal structures and expectation is a real loss to the profession, and they've got so much insight and views to gain. I don't like to make designs gender specific. Like, I think men and women, we all individuals design in our own ways, but certainly in terms of cutting the pool of talent, because of sort of, as I said, the way the welfare system is structured is a real loss to the profession.
Yeah. Amazing. Jennifer, I need to ask you, we are at 10 past. I think we're done. Are we finished now?
I think, Gurvinder, if possible, if we have a last question, I think we can.
I do. Have we got time? Yes. Fantastic. Thank you.
A few more minutes. It's so interesting. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, so the third question that's been sent on. Thank you so much for the questions, by the way. Are transgender women being taken into account in discussions? Barbara, what do you think? You're on mute, Barbara.
Absolutely, they should be. If they're not, as I think I sort of may have touched on earlier, I'm very reluctant to label people or to categorize people. I think there's an ethos that needs to run through everything we do, be integral to everything that we endeavor to design together. That includes, and that we need to actively listen, actively observe, actively include. And certainly, as far as the Bartlett School of Architecture is concerned, gender, all genders are welcomed and included as best we can. But as has been said by Katja and others, we need to get much better at it. That would be my initial response.
If I am also speaking from our institution, let's say, and the way that we are working with architecture and gender from a feminist theory point of view, I would say that the way that we are approaching things, we are doing it in a very we are taking sort of intersectional perspectives, and we are really working, making sure that one kind of understands all the complexities of positionings and genders, and so I think we are. But it's very easy to still fall into like the kind of simplifications of a kind of binary gender perspectives and so forth. So you need to be constantly reminded and to, as Barbara said, think about language and what language is doing and how it's dividing. So it's a very, very, very good question and important to raise. Absolutely.
Of course, and
Sorry,
I can
please.
also agree, and I think the Architect Sweden, we are working a lot with this kind of issue involving everyone, and I think it is also important not to label people, whether it's a woman or a transgender or homosexual or whatever. If it is about religion or ethnicity, I think we're just talking about people, and doing that, we just can't forget about these inequalities. So I think we have a lot to do, but I think mostly we have to work on raising awareness of what it means to be transgender, and then just go further on.
Amazing. Catherine, do you have anything to add, or?
Well, sort of equally, I think I sort of what everyone's talked about, just, you know, it's all about equality and sort of encompassing as many people as possible into the profession. In order to broaden the talent.
Yeah, so it's about people. Yeah, exactly. Well, I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank for incredibly inspirational people. You've been hugely invigorating and interesting, and hopefully the panel have enjoyed it as well. So thank you very much for joining us, and thank you to the audience as well. I hope you found it interesting. I certainly did. And I think there's going to be a short break now, and then I think there's about 10 minutes break, and then the next sort of discussion will take place. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Gervin,
and other
questions.
panelists. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, here we go. Hello. Hello.
Hello, welcome back everyone, and welcome Helena. We are a few minutes late due to some technical issues that have now been resolved, but I don't think any of us are very surprised in this new kind of working way. I believe you all see Helena on the screen right now. There will be more panelists joining in a moment. They're just coming back from a separate meeting room, but we are starting in a few minutes, just so you are aware. All right, I think now we have all the panelists and the moderator back with us. So welcome everybody to this second session. Again, apologies for a bit of a delay. We had some technical difficulties, but now I see that everybody's here, which is the most important. So this is the second session of today, Women in Architecture and Design. And I am not an expert, so I will directly be handing over to Charlotta Holm-Klint, who is the head of planning at Haninge Municipality. So Charlotta, if you want to kick off the session, please do so. And I think Charlotta might be on mute currently.
Ah, well, there you go. As I said earlier, when we started off having technical difficulties, this is the third most common comment during 2020. You're on mute. So then I'll start again. Most welcome to the second session of today. And in this panel session, we will discuss a range of issues for women in architecture, and also continuing from the first session. But we will focus on slightly different things, like the commission gap, the gender pay gap, the seniority level gap, as well as COVID-19 related challenges for professionals in the field, and much more, I presume. During the first part of the session, we will listen to our 4 panelists sharing their stories with us. They are all role models of different kind, and they will share their experience, their choices, and possibly their adjusted behavior to manage their professional lives as young architects. After that, we will have a joint discussion about the topics of the session, and please do feel free to ask questions in the chat of the meeting. We will use the last part of the session for questions and answers. I would also like to ask all of you to mind the setting and keep microphones and camera off. My name is Charlotta Holm-Klint. I am an architect myself, educated in both Sweden and Britain. I too have met the challenges of being a woman in the profession, and even had the opportunity to work in the equivalent of RIBA, Architect Sweden, and there I could address the issues we are discussing in this session on a national level. So this is a topic that is very, very close to my heart. For those who missed the first session on setting the scene, it is good to have some background on where this session is starting from. Because although women are becoming more represented in architecture in the UK and Sweden, with 35% of architects in the UK and actually 60.5% in Sweden being female, we can still see that there is a pay gap in both countries. Men active in the field in the UK earn on average £1,485 more per year than their female counterparts, whilst men in Swedish architecture field earn around £500 more per year than women not as much. Whilst we see a high number of women in the architecture schools, between 50 to 60% in both countries, we see that only about 20% of UK firms have women in senior roles. In Sweden, 6 out of 10 board members in architectural firms are men. However, there is evidence to show that the largest architectural companies in Sweden have a significantly higher representation of women in their boards. It is evident that there are still issues with inequality within the field of architecture. And after a rather special year dominated by this global pandemic, these inequalities may have been exacerbated. To speak further on this today, I would like to present you to the panelists, and maybe you can wave your hands and your names are in Teams. We have Angela Dapper, the principal of Grimshaw Architects. Welcome, Angela. We have Joe Bacon, chair of RIBA International Committee and partner at Alice and Morrison. Welcome, Joe. We also have from Sweden, Helena Bjarnegård, who is the state architect, the first state architect actually, on the National Board of Housing, Building and Planning. And last but not least, Rael Bellacciu, who is the architect and founder at Bellacciu Architects. Those 4 are role models, something that was discussed in the former session. And we will now have the opportunity to listen to each and every one of them sharing their story. And I'm very, very proud to present the first panelist to you. Helena Bjarnegård, please do share your story with us.
Thank you. And thank you for having me here. I'm it was so interesting to listen to the panel we had before. And I just was, oh, what should we say more? They said it all almost. It was fantastic. Anyway, my story. You asked in the questions that we had before, why did you choose architecture? And why did I choose architecture? Well, I wanted to influence the society. I wanted to make a change some way. First, I was interested in engineering and I started out there, but I thought it was actually very, very boring. So I thought, what do I think is fun? Because if I'm going to work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for 40 years, it needs to be fun. I need to enjoy it. And I need to be able to influence the society one way or another. And I was very interested in design and sustainability too. So therefore, I chose landscape architecture. So I'm a landscape architect. And we were talking before about gender equality and so on. And entering the School of Landscape Architects in 1990, we were a class of 36 women and 4 men. So really, this is much different from the housing architect school at that time, I think. So I have quite another experience. So we were talking leadership, we were talking sustainability, we were talking architecture, design for 5 years, and we were a bunch of women. And I can see all of those women in my class right now. They're out in the society and they have high positions all over the society, in the private sector and in the public sector. They're everywhere. So I think we had a very, very good education. We had a male teacher. He got to be the executive director of Trafikverket, the biggest public agency in Sweden for traffic, actually. And for infrastructure, of course. And he told us that do not see any limits. Do not stick to the landscape architect field. You can do so much to influence the society. So go out there, make a difference, and just be proud of being a landscape architect. And you can do so much more than just working with, architecture. That's good enough too, but who really, high the level of what we could do. So he was very good, and he was a great influencer. I started to work in the public sector. And the public sector at that time was male sector, kind of hardcore. One of the first things that happened was that I had to go to a meeting with Skanska, 7 o'clock in the morning, you know, big cup of coffee, very black, probably from the day before. You just had to drink it because you need to be tough some way. And I had actually interviewed my husband the day before because I knew that they're going to talk about ice hockey for 40 minutes and then about the project for 10 minutes. So to influence the project, I needed to keep up with the ice hockey discussion. So I interviewed my husband this morning, who won the league, who was the game the day before, what can I say? And he gave me some one-liners, and I just had to deliver those one-liners, and then everybody thought that I was so into hockey. And then the project really went my way too. So that was very good. And I got another project, and as I had all those projects with kind of a lot of money in it, I got invited as the first woman to the strategic Monday lunch sittings at the office. Just male architects having big projects, and a very, very young landscape architect, female, me. And I tried to make my voice heard in this room. It was very, very difficult. You know, I had a strategic idea and no one listened. And 5 minutes after, a man said the same idea and everybody said, "Oh, well done, Åke." But then the most senior person in this room, the chair of this strategic discussion, he really, in a very quiet and inclusive way, told the other guys that you should listen to Helena, and he invited me into the discussion in a very polite way, and his actions led to that the other persons also listened to me. So I learned something there, that when you chair a meeting, it's very, very important to include everybody in the room, even if they're very young and not as experienced as the other ones are. So I learned that. And I also learned a lot about leadership, and I got interested in leadership and educated myself and got educated in leadership. I got a position on the board of this big, very, very Swedish largest architect firm at the time, and learned a lot about, you know, the private sector and how to run a very, very big company and so on. And then suddenly I changed to work in the public sector. And that was quite a difference, because this, you know, the hardcore male situation was all gone, because the highest person on the highest political committee, she was a woman. The strategic manager for the whole city, a woman. The 6 executive directors of the 6 very, very, very big agencies, planning agencies, real estate agencies, infrastructure agency, and so on, all women. So in the public sector in Sweden, that's like a women world, actually. And we've had all those measures for ages, measuring equality and so on. So that was quite a big difference, and now we can talk about more about that later. But really, those different experiences from those different worlds, and having being supported actually by several male mentors during this journey, I find myself in a position now when I really can use all the knowledge that I have got in all those different kind of positions in the private sector and in the public sector and so on. So I stop there and invite the others to talk.
Thank you very much, Helena. That's so interesting, and apparently you learned a lot.
I learned a lot.
Considering where you are right now. Joe, would you like to continue, please?
Thanks, Carlotta. Lovely to be here. I'm Jo Bacon. I'm an architect. I'm a partner at Allies & Morrison. I also am at the RIBA, so I chair the awards group. I'm a trustee and also an international committee chair. But I'm also simultaneously a parent, and I hope a champion of equality and diversity in architecture. I chaired the Gender Pay Gap Working Group, which produced a report for the RIBA called Close the Gap, which was in 2018. And that has helped me understand the sort of facts and figures behind what's going on in the profession. I have a theory that many who start a journey in architecture start their early lives experiencing extraordinary places. So I spent my early years in a 15th century Tudor house, only to be transported in the 1960s to Honolulu, to a condominium where my family rejoiced in all things modern and in tall buildings. So I chose architecture after those experiences, much to the horror of my father, who was an ex-contractor who said, "Women make awful architecture," to me when I was 14. It's been one of the extraordinary honours of my life to have been working with my university tutor, Bob Allies, for more than 33 years now, and to have joined him and Graham to help build up our practice from the 4 we were in 1987 to the 300 we are now. In 1980, 40 years ago, when I joined architecture school, there were fewer than 20% of women entering into UK courses, and more like 15% at my university. That figure only rose to 50% for the first time in the UK in 2016. So that's the good news. The bad news is that around 10% of women studying still fall away in education and do not qualify as an architect. And furthermore, more women leave the profession in later years. Govinda, in the previous session, presented the data about 29% of practicing architects being women. But worse still is that only 9% of people in architectural practices are from mixed ethnic backgrounds. So in the UK, there's a huge amount to be tackled. Architecture has fewer women than law or medicine, and it needs to be more accessible to lower income candidates, ethnic minorities, and those who've qualified internationally. Therein our Brexit problem. The government data shows that across the architecture industry as a whole, there's a gender pay gap in favour of men, with the mean being around 11%. And that's really the official figure, but that data is gleaned from the larger practices, so the reality across practices of all sizes is probably much worse. So we need to recruit from diverse backgrounds, promote progression in practice, and retain women in architecture. I've been fortunate to have worked for the last 20 years on a part-time basis, and yet that has not stopped me delivering major projects and being at the core of the strategic direction of our practice. During COVID, we have learned to be even more flexible, and trust has been built in our people, in our technology, to support more flexible working, which is certainly good for all and here to stay. My children are now in their 20s, off on their own careers, and I feel that my partner and my equal investment in our careers when the children were small was a huge joint commitment. We found lovely people to trust and to support us all. It was a struggle, particularly financially, but the support we built was for all of us, and now as a family, we don't regret any of it. I hope I have something to bring to today's discussion, because I would like to encourage the widest diversity of people into the profession and the wider connected areas that come from an education in architecture. I'm proud that Allies and Morrison has been one of the top 10 practices employing one of the largest percentage of women, but there is so much more to do every single day.
Thank you very much, Jo. That's quite a journey. I can't wait to jump into some of the figures, and we will do that in a minute. But first of all, Rael, would you like to share your story with us?
So just unmute. Thank you, Charlotta. Thank you everyone for inviting me for this panel. So I'm Rahel Bellatro. I'm an architect and I'm the founder of Bellatro Architects. We're based here in Stockholm. And so my journey with architecture actually started quite late. I didn't have any architects in my family. I didn't know of the profession. But in my teens, I came across the mother of a friend who was an interior designer. And that's how I discovered the whole world, the universe of design and architecture. And initially, I actually wanted to study interior design. And I was in Paris, and I was looking into the different options when I found out that the study to become an interior designer was 5 years, which is the same as for architect. But as an architect, you would have the possibility of actually designing the building and the interior. So that would give me a larger option. And I decided then to go for architecture, and I studied at the École Spéciale d'Architecture in Paris. And in my school, I would say we were roughly 50-50, equal amount of women and men, slightly outnumbered by men, maybe 40-60%. And although one could imagine France maybe not being as much on gender equality as we would be used to in Sweden, I never felt any of that during my studies. We were all treated equally, and the projects would speak for themselves. Our teachers also called us by our last name. So I was Belachev, like in a French pronunciation, Russian-ish something. But which also kind of neutralized the gender, because there were no, Anna or Peter. It was just the last name. And my memory of our project is like very often the girls would have maybe the best project. So I didn't feel any that we weren't treated any differently. And during my studies, and also in the beginning of my career, also parallel to my studies, I was always interested in establishing a business of my own, of some kind. I didn't know at that time what it would be. At some point, I imagined I would have an atelier somewhere. I would do some drawing and some crafting, but then, which I also did while I was studying. But eventually, I established an architectural firm, and it was never an issue for me. It was kind of something I always aimed for from the very beginning. And I think, thinking back, it might also have been a strategy to sort of tackle this kind of rigid structures that exist, that going your own way gives you an option to actually do what you like. And during my first years as employed, I worked for a few companies before establishing Bellaccio. I would very often be the only woman around the table, often the youngest one as well. And I would think of all these, middle-aged men who were taking all the decisions. And as some of you mentioned, making one's voice heard is not an easy thing. And it's kind of interesting to look at the situation today. Today we are a lot of women around the table, and the decision makers in the field of real estate, or also in our communication contact with the public sector, are very often women. So today we have middle-aged women around the table, just like myself. So now I actually understand what the man would feel like back then, when I was the sole female. So I see this kind of development, and it's very strong here in Sweden. We're a very international company. We have people from every corner of the world. And some of them, in the beginning, they would be quite surprised. They come back from their first meeting and they say, wow, so many women around the table. So probably Sweden is a little bit maybe unique in that sense. And I think it's very interesting to see that. At the same time, we can see that not many young female architects are running companies. So I think that's one of the issues we'd have to work with to encourage them and make sure that we have more women on senior level positions.
Thank you very much, Rael. It's an interesting thing you're mentioning there about middle-aged women.
Yeah.
Me being one as well.
Of course.
We'll come back to that. And last but not least, Angela. Angela, could you share your story as well?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Angela Dapper. I'm a principal at Grimshaw Architects in the London office. I chair our diversity group at Grimshaw Architects, which we call the Umbrella Group. And the idea of being the umbrella is we want to encourage all sorts of diversity in every which way. I also use the learnings from my practical experience to help advise others across the industry, including the RIBA as part of their diversity group, Architects for Change. I'm also an RIBA counsellor. I speak with other practices, universities and institutions, including advising the Mayor of London's diversity group, because I think it's important to share the learnings across the wider industry. I've been an advocate for gender equality in architecture for many years, and this stems from me personally feeling the impact of not seeing many women in the roles I wanted to do. I knew from a young age I wanted to work in a really big architecture firm. I grew up in Australia. I looked around for role models and there were none. And interestingly, it really made me stop and reconsider whether that's the career that was right for me. And I don't want other people to stop and think about that in that way. I looked for statistics when I first graduated in the 90s for how many women were in directorship positions in Australia. And at the time, there were 0. And that's tough. I think that's tough as a young architect to see that and to know where you're going. So I moved to the UK, which was slightly better. Things have improved in both countries since, thankfully. But I think what that made me see was the real value of mentors and role models throughout my career and how important that is. So as much as I've tried to, just done my normal job with my head down and got my work done, I've also spoken out and advocated for other females in the profession to make sure there is a path, a visible path, so they can proceed throughout their careers. And I think this is really important. And I think there's nothing more empowering than seeing someone that looks like you and sounds like you doing roles that you want to be doing because you can see your way there. I've been at Grimshaw for 2 years now, and part of the reason I changed later in my career to Grimshaw was for the value and emphasis they put on diversity and equality. They take it really, really seriously. It's tracked and measured every quarter, setting targets, looking for and removing barriers to make sure that what we're putting in place is making change. And most importantly, holding ourselves to account, like making sure we are achieving the targets that we're looking for. And also, I think, and I don't know whether this is the case, I think in the UK, for us, gender equality is hard work. We have to keep our eye on the ball and keep working on it because it's not a natural state of being for us in the UK. It's a project. We need to work hard. The other main reason, or another of the key reasons I work at Grimshaw is because our managing partner is female. And while this might not seem like such a big deal, for me, it was really important to see a woman leading a large practice, particularly with 2 kids. Like, I don't see many women with kids in senior positions. And for me, this is the kind of role model I was looking for, someone that was normal, that could also take on these big roles. Also, I see that it's very important to share knowledge and information like we're doing today to inspire others. But also to make change in not just our own practices, but in the wide profession, because that's how really we're going to make change and advocate for others to increase the numbers. And the last thing I want to say is, so across our practice, we're around 300. And I think this is something that we've seen across the wide industry and we've talked about, is a lot of the time we're seeing equality almost up to kind of mid-career level architects. And so we're really seeing that this is the point that we need to look at how we support them and stop them leading the profession. So for me, they're our future and they're our way forward. So this is where we need to focus our attention. And whether that's on creating better support for parenthood and for people coming and leaving the profession at this point, we need to be, I think, really focused on these people, because I have my faith in these people becoming the future of architecture in the UK and creating the equality that we're all looking for. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. And they were talking in the former session about the different arenas an architect can work within, and you're really talking about policy making and policy making in the businesses, working where we stand, making change. It's really interesting. I was thinking that, because we were also talking about in the former session about the importance of class and the opportunities to actually enter the role as a senior architect, and actually the seniority levels. I'm not really sure that there is a commission gap in Sweden. There may be some in UK. Please enlighten us about that. But I'm also thinking about where it's been hard to find the money. The money is still leading the countries. What attitudes do we meet as women? Do we meet different attitudes? Is it harder to get a prosperous client? What are your experience around that? Anyone who would like to start? Are there any differences, first of all, in commission? We know there is in salaries, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I think commissions is hard to define because there isn't much data. We've had some amazing female architects in the UK, from Zaha Hadid to now Alison Brooks, who are named leaders of their practices. But the property world is quite male biased. But I feel that increasingly design isn't a macho world, that women aren't respected. So I was amused recently to meet two other women, Karen Cook from PLP and Tanya from Eric Parry Associates, and all three of us were leading towers, teams for a tower in the City of London. So in a world which ordinarily people historically might not have seen women operating, that those barriers are getting broken down, but the reality of the data is probably slightly different. So there are some good leaders, but the data is probably not strong.
Interesting. As in terms of salary, what are the challenges we are facing there, and how do we go about it? How can we get an equal pay for the same job?
Helena? Raising my hand, but how do? Is it okay if I speak?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Feel free.
I go ahead. I think there is a gap between salaries, I'm sure, and even if we don't see it in our when we compare, I think there are differences, because what we don't see is if you have a big company and you get money from your stocks and so on. So we don't see all the salary money when we're comparing the salaries, actually. But I think that we should really focus on why is it a difference and what can we do about it. Is it just to say that women should have as much as men, or does it start before? Because I've seen things happening at the big architecture firm where I worked a long time ago, that a man and a woman starts the job at the same time. They come directly from the school. They are very talented, both of them. The woman starts working with one of the older men who is he's very talented, and he has a very interesting commissions, and it's very, I'm sure it's very fun to work with him because it's big jobs and you can do a lot of things, but she works, she's helping him, and the guy, he helps another man, and the other man says, oh, you're a guy, why don't you come with me to a meeting? I introduce you to the builder and to the ones who give us jobs. Sorry, my English. And he got introduced, he got his own jobs, his own commissions. She didn't get her own jobs, her own commissions, because she helped out in those large projects, doing a lot, using her talent, but she helped out. And the guy, he got introduced to the arenas where the commissioners are, and he got his own commissions. He had his own jobs, and he got a leadership position, and of course a higher salary. So it started much earlier. Of course, after 10 years, maybe he should have a higher salary because he did more. He had bigger commissions. He put a lot of people on this job and so on, and she didn't. But it started long before that. Did she get the opportunity? Was she introduced to the same people and so on? Did she get to go to the leadership courses as he attended? And so on. So it started much earlier. So I think we need to see the big picture in this. And also we talked about the parental leave. I think that in Sweden, a lot of men, they are at home when the kids are small, but when the kids are about 4 years old, 5 years old, 6, 7, and the kid gets ill, who will stay at home? And I'm sure there are more women staying at home with a sick kid than men. I'm sure. I haven't seen the figures, but I'm sure it is like that. So you need to see the big picture all the time. Okay, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you.
And also, Helena, just continuing from your earlier point, I think, creating the culture, like it's a very male culture in some respects. So when you were talking about hockey before, we have the same with rugby. It's kind of set up in a certain way that it takes a little while to kind of break down the kind of cultural norms that we're seeing until change takes place. Even our speech that we use, like, men, we always have men at work signs. It's always men at work. Where is the space for women in that kind of language as well? Man hours. There's all sorts of. I've been called the right man for the job, which I find really odd. Like, why would you say these things? But this is the kind of language that were created, and the same with the culture. Women have the kind of the caring side, so they do. Initially step into those kind of caring roles. So when we are talking about pay gaps and things like that, often, so we're finding that in the UK there's less getting paid differently for the same job. The pay gap is caused more by more men in senior positions, for one, but also women being more likely to take a part-time role, which also distorts salaries. So when we're looking at things like parental policies, so making sure that they're equal for men and women, because men also want to pick them up. I don't think this is a women's issue. Men also want to pick up parental policies and have a better part in their child's upbringing. So it's making it accessible. So then in return, men are more likely to take on part-time roles. And then you'll find the balance starting to come back. But for us, particularly in the UK, it's about creating those kind of support mechanisms to create work-life balance. So it's not always kind of seen as the kind of, women need to step back for caring positions, or they need to reduce hours for a work-life balance. We need to make the whole of architecture as a profession a better balance for work and life.
And Joe, you're raising your hand, please. And your microphone is off.
I would say equal pay is an obligation under the law in the UK and Europe, and we have to be very mindful of that at all times. The issue is that retaining women in architecture. So when you do a gender pay gap analysis, you divide the groups into 4 quarters. So you have the top quarter of the paid staff and the lower quarter. And the issue is in the top quarter is retaining women, staying in the profession. Yes, there was a gap because there were fewer of us entering into the profession historically, but we need to kind of retain that talent and make certain in lots of ways that Helena is talking about, that those people are promoted, and we are mentoring their progression in the profession. And mentoring their progression means discarding any prejudices that might be there because people are taking some leave at some point in their life to look after their families. So it's very important, that role that we play as senior women, to be mentors to our next generation of talent.
Yes, that's a good pointer. Taking responsibility and lead the way as leaders and women. But we also take for granted here, because we are all very equally biased in this issue. Why is it important to have women designing the buildings that we live and work in? Rael?
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to, join the previous topic. And I think, like you're saying, Joe, the question of role model, I think, is really essential and crucial. And I was talking about my years during the studies, but actually, I mean, I didn't feel, anything was in favor for the male students. But speaking of role models and architects studying history, we never spoke about women architects. They were all male. I mean, really, and nothing I thought of at the time. But today, looking back, I can see that. And the commission gap, I'm not sure we have that in Sweden. I'd be very interested to take part of data. And I guess, it depends on how you measure. If we statistically have more male running companies, then, that will also be visible in the statistics. And for salary gap, that's an issue across the board. It's not just architecture, it's in every profession. There is a problem with the pay gap. And lots of times it will be referred to women, connected to taking responsibility for household, working part-time, and so forth. But I did look at the chart for the statistics in Sweden, and actually a couple of years ago, women architects had higher salaries than male, coming from always something like 10 or 15% less, but then all of a sudden it was the other way around. And that was at the time when the economy was very strong. So a strong economy in society obviously is in favor for female architects. And now, from 2018 and forth, the economy is not at all that strong. So what happens? Well, it drops. So now the female salaries are lower again. And the question is, what will happen after COVID? I mean, we are obviously entering some kind of a crisis that we haven't really seen where that will lead us. But of course, there is no reason whatsoever that there should be any difference in pay, in salary between a woman and a man. And then you had another question. Why? What was the question? Why is it important
to have women designing the buildings that we live and work in?
Well, I mean, women make up half the population in the world, and so which means we represent a fair amount of people who have certain needs and see life in a certain way, and that has to be taken into account. It's like if you only have men designing products for women, I mean, at the end there will be a problem. you need the user, the person using the product or living in the building to be heard and to take into account the different needs that we have. And that's not just the women. I would say that anyone living in an urban environment should be involved, and we should take into account the different needs that we have from different perspectives, from children, from elderly workers, or people staying mainly at home.
Working at the city of Gothenburg, we made a policy document about public realm and gender equality, and we saw that the things actually that are good for gender equality is good for all. It's about feeling safe, feeling everybody should feel welcome, sense of place, and all of those issues that we really, everybody needs it and enjoys it. So it's not a bad thing if it's good for women either. It's when probably it will be good for all if we address those issues that are very important for women, of course. It's also important to see equity and to see, we were talking about gender, but also ethnicity and all sorts of equity, and the symbols that we place in the cities when we build them, as sculptures, for example. What do they do with us? What kind of? It's not just feeling welcome to a place, designing a very, very nice building or public space. It's about the art and sculptures and so on. And we just we had a colleague going out in the parks in Gothenburg, taking pictures of the sculptures in the parks. And when we saw them all together, we got shocked actually, because almost all male sculptures had very nice clothing, armors. They were standing on podiums, and they were big, and they looked proud, and the future is mine, like this. And almost all the sculptures of women, they were naked, they looked shy, they had no podium, and there was even a sculpture in a bush with a very afraid woman being attacked by a troll. So it was like, what do those symbols do with people? What do they do with their mind? What do we think of the city and how we are welcomed to the city? So I think it's very, very important how we design the buildings, the public realm, and even think of what does art say to us? What kind of symbols are they?
This is so interesting, and we have covered so many topics, and I really wanted to cover even more. Time is running fast, and we have some questions from the audience. I will have to. This is a quite long question, so bear with me. I wanted to ask the panel about the importance of networking when working in a creative field industry to secure career growth, sales, pitches, award nominations, etc. Do you think there are differences in the way women versus men build their business networks and the traditional preference to build on stereotypical masculine traits in this? And if so, what do you perceive as advantages and disadvantages in the way women in creative industries build their professional networks? Is there anyone who would like to answer or address this issue?
I can have a go.
Yes.
I think what I've seen in the industry in the last few years particularly is in terms of networking events, there's far more women at networking events, which is, I think, made a massive difference in terms of the way we network. So we don't have to go to the rugby. There are other opportunities for networking, and we've actually got a lot more female clients as well, which I think has kind of made a massive difference in terms of how functions and networking happens and the kind of environments that we create. But from this, I think we can kind of, so we're kind of talk about the alpha male type society. What we don't kind of also allow for is introverts. So, there are so many introverts and different diversities across our industry that kind of typical networking never allowed for. And I think in the last few years, we've been seeing a lot more in terms of opportunities for networking. A lot of our current clients are introverts. They don't want to be out partying and drinking and doing all these things. And I think we need to remember that, it's not just diversity in terms of our own professions. We have diversity in our clients as well and who we're reaching out to. So we have a lot of similarities. And so sometimes we just need to be brave and go, look, we're not going to go to the rugby. We're just going to do this instead. Can we have a cup of tea? Or, and people will really respond to that. So I think there's a lot more networking options out there, which is great. And I think it's so good for women to get out and see that and actually be a part of what's happening in the wider culture.
Yeah. Do you think the pandemic has changed anything of this?
Yeah, I was going to say we're kind of in an information era, and the pandemic has been very interesting in the ability to present bits of research or bits of knowledge between people, and that might be internally in the studios or it might be externally to clients in a very more informal way, without it having to be a kind of formal gathering, and you can get quite close to people online and just to sort of say to them, after a meeting, you had an interest in that kind of project or that kind of problem. I've done some research onto that, and I could just show you 10 minutes, some slides I did on that, or a project where we overcame this problem. And clients have been so receptive to that follow-up call in the pandemic after a big kind of Zoom meeting or whatever. If you pick up the intelligence, and everybody has interesting data now. So, and if you give people a small amount of warning and just say, I just had a follow-up to our conversation in that meeting. Could I make a 15-minute call with you and I'll present you a few slides? It's been amazing how those connections in the remote working have been really positive. And I've found that very encouraging and not at all biased in relation to gender. Very interesting.
Thank you. And talking about that, do you think that the pandemic will change how we work? What opportunities are there for the future?
We are definitely committing to a future blended way of working. We don't know what the end path will be, but we're assuming as we come back to the studios that people will be working around 60% of the time in the studios when everybody's well enough to do that and it's safe enough to do that. But it'll be very much a journey for all of us. It's change. And we've all adapted to change so much in this last 12 months that's a fast moving process, and we'll just have to see. But I definitely know that the trust and the commitment that people have shown to do work remotely has to be rewarded in a much more flexible way of working for the future.
Thank you. We could hope that this will make the lives for young female architects with small children to have an easier way of working around the clock and balancing life and work. Hopefully it's a game changer.
And if they shall be able to do that, they need to lose their sense of control in their home and give the control to their husband, actually, even if they sit at home and work. So the control over the kids. So that's also very, very good advice.
Yes, I'm not sure it's just positive. I think I'm quite sure that a lot of the new way of working and living that we have been forced to adapt to because we didn't have any choice. We also see the positive sides of it, that we are more flexible. We don't have to commute to work. We just had a chat before this panel. People are living in Spain, in India. They're everywhere, and we can still manage to collaborate. So we've done a lot of progress in how we use the technology. But there is also a risk, if we're talking about the gender equality, that there is, some people already see a tendency of women actually, they're at home anyway, all the time. So they tend to take on the burden of keeping up the whole household and the kids and doing the work from home. So I think one has to be cautious and be clear about setting up the, some rules and making sure to share the responsibility, because it all boils down to how do you manage your professional life at the same time as you're raising kids. And I think that's the biggest challenge for women entering the profession. And networking, please, all young professionals listening, make sure to network as much as you can, because it's a very good opportunity to share your thoughts, to share your challenges, and to discuss with others in similar positions. They don't have to be in your professional field. They can be anywhere else, but usually the challenges are the same. I would encourage. And a mentor is a good idea as well, if you find one.
Thank you, Rael. And you actually, I'm thinking we have 4 minutes, and you get 1 minute each to say something to all the young women who are finalizing the university and soon to be entering the professional world. What would you say to them today? What advice would you like to share with them? Joe, would you like to go first?
Be flexible. Be flexible in yourself, be flexible with your staff, and wake up every day and learn something new, because it'll be very useful along your journey.
Thank you. Helena, what would you say?
Take time to have fun. Have no fear, and do not apologize.
Ah, brilliant. And Angela?
I just want to say architecture, I think, is a fantastic profession. It offers so many different projects and ways of working that you need to find the way of working that suits you and work with people that value you. That's my advice.
Great. And finally, Rael.
Well, I would say, just say yes. Whenever you're offered a new position or a new challenge that you seem like, wow, I've never done this before, I'm not going to manage, just say yes. And you will learn a lot of things. You will look back and you will say to yourself, well, that wasn't too bad. And you should keep in mind that if somebody gives you the opportunity to take on some leadership or a new role, it's because that person believes in you and is confident that you can do it. So don't be the one, preventing yourself from moving forward. Just say yes. Tacka ja, we say in Swedish. Just say yes, and it will be brilliant.
Oh, that's really good advice. I could go on for ages talking to you. This has been so interesting for me, at least. I hope it has been for the audience as well. Thank you so much in the panel for sharing your stories and being the role models that you are. And I hope I see you soon somewhere else in time. And thank you from me as well, from a snowy Stockholm today. And now I think it's time for a break.
Oh, we say yes to that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good job, Charlotte.
Bye.
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 All right, everyone, welcome back from the break. This is the third and final session of today, which is architecture and design for women. I will not be speaking long. I'll introduce to you the moderator of this panel, which is Madeleine Beckman, who is a curator at learning at the Swedish Center for Architecture and Design here in Sweden. So Madeleine, please feel welcome to start the panel.
Thank you very much. So, hi and most welcome to this session, the last one. I hope you stretched your legs during the break, got a bit of coffee or a cup of tea. As I was introduced, I work at the National Center for Architecture and Design here in Stockholm called ArchDes. Been there for the last 20 years. And when I started, I came from the Science Museum, where we worked very actively with inclusion questions and gender issues. So I was a bit surprised and actually more gobsmacked when I heard or was actually told that architecture had nothing to do with gender. So it's been a lovely development during these 20 odd years that I've been at ArchDes to see how this field has developed and became more official. I don't know if the embassy's DIT team is aware of this, but this is a very important day for women in Sweden. It is actually 100 years ago today that the last decision about our right to vote came along. So a good day to pick this day. Today I have the privilege to present a wonderful panel that will discuss and put the spotlight on architecture and design for women, tackling current design and security issues, state architecture made for men, practicing architecture as a woman, and why women's leadership is essential for the world of architecture. This very competent panel is then Angela Brady, who is an architect director of Bradley Milieu Architects, specializing in contemporary sustainable design and promote low carbon buildings in her practice. She champions diversity and equality in our profession. She's a past president of the RIBA and voted the most effective president in the past 20 years. She's an artist, TV broadcaster, and design champion. She was awarded an OBE and a PDSA for services to architecture. Congratulations. And then we have Giliama Paulson, head of urban development at AFRI. She started working in OF 2012 and became section manager for urban planning in Malmö, Sweden in 2014. She was appointed as head of urban development in 2018, where she works to develop AFRI's offering within smart city as it grows. The third panelist that we have is Kirsty Dias, director at Priestman Good. She has worked there since 2001, acting in the capacity of project manager and as head of communications. She became an associate director in 2013 and a director in 2016. Prior, Kirsty has worked at the British Council and the Design Council, promoting British design to international markets. Kirsty has been instrumental in developing Priestman Good's concept on the future of transports and establishing the company as thought leaders in design and innovation. The fourth panelist is Jannica Wiklander, CEO at Okidoki Architects. She's an architect, landscape architect, and lighting designer. Previously, she has been office manager at Tengbom Gruppen, where she also was in the management group. Prior to that, she had a leading role within OF Lighting and was part of the team that built up and developed the company Ljusarkitektur. Jannica Klander came into a new position as CEO of Okie Dokie Architects in November 2000. So thank you very much, all four of you, to come along on this journey and joining us this afternoon. I would like to start with a discussion on how our cities are organized. So we're going to talk about how cities organize, but also down to the details within the product designs. But let's start with the cities. There is a book called Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez, whose books, and within this book, she argues that cities haven't been designed to suit the lives of women. Criado Perez argues that zoning laws would specify the areas of a city in which residential, industrial, recreational or commercial activities may occur do not adequately take into account the lives of many women. For example, cities has been designed around the idea that work takes place in factories or offices, and that the home is a place for rest and recreation. However, many women are engaged in unpaid care work. They have different travel patterns because they're dropping off the kids, or they are looking at elderly relatives, and they are combining that with their paid work. Criado Perez believes mixed-use zoning should be implemented more often, and that more investment should be put into public transport routes. Furthermore, not enough attention has been paid to the threat of violence against women in the design of public spaces. And there I also would like to add that the most dangerous place for a woman to be is in her own home, which is something that maybe we can reflect on later on. Kirsty, if you would like to start, because you have actually read the whole book.
Yes, that's right. Thanks so much, Madeleine. I mean, firstly, I'd highly recommend reading the book. It is full of examples and case studies which illustrate we live in a world largely designed by men and for men, and that this research and data around female consultation is largely absent in many sectors. But for me, I suppose what's striking about this from a product design perspective is that the approach to, all our projects at Priestman Good begin with the user, identifying who they are, what are their needs, how do people behave in specific situations. And it's only really through this consultation that you acquire the insights to design successful products that are tailored to the user, to their requirements, and that are fit for purpose. So, I mean, the book is in fact a catalogue of projects gone wrong in many ways, because what we strive to seek is, of course, the widest consultation to bring about the best results. And I guess it's primarily about inclusion is what we seek to do now. So I think that would be, my kind of prime takeaway from the book. And I think the other one is, beyond being inclusive and having those voices heard, is also, I think, her opinion that one of the things that is the greatest influencer is about representation, and that we need to see greater representation in positions of power or influence, that women need to be represented more. And I think, in my experience, that's about not just on the design side, but it's also about client side as well. So, I think that's the important takeaway. I would also say, though, that the book is obviously very focused on the absence of data around women. And I think future generations, certainly, younger designers, I think are less focused on gender. They are much more kind of gender fluid and, are advocating for equality for all. So I'd be interested to hear what everybody has to say about that.
Could someone in the panel from Sweden, I'm thinking about the Hemmets Forskningsinstitut, HFSI. Because that is a institute that was actually lifting up and looking upon the home as a place for work. Is there someone else in the... It's a bit pity because I can't see the rest of you. I can see you, Kirsty, but the rest of the panel, if it's possible, if you can turn on your camera so that we can interact a little bit better, it would be lovely.
I have my camera on though.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh dear. Oh yeah, technical skills. Giliama, are you there? Is that the main question right now? Is Helena in the meeting?
Yes, I am here. Can
Lovely.
you see and can
now
hear
we
me?
can see you and see you. Lovely.
Excellent.
Do you have any reflections around this book?
Well, I haven't read the book though, so thank you for the introduction. But I think what you're touching upon there, Christy, that there's sort of starting with the needs, because I think there is no sort of universal women's interest, right? That also differs, and I think that's really important to point out here as well. And of course, it's about diversity in general, and that has also been touched upon in the other panels earlier. But I think also when you, in the beginning here, when you talked a little bit about the book, and you were also mentioning public transport, right? And yes, sort of the importance of that. I can mention that in Sweden, I think it was almost 1 year ago now, there was a study made that if men were to travel like women, we would actually reduce, the emission from passenger cars or transport with 20%. Just by changing that behavior. And I think that's quite remarkable. And what does it mean then, traveling like a woman? Well, that would mean using your bike more and actually public transport. And that's really something that is, I think it's a big sort of structural change in our cities, if we were to look upon that, and who is sort of given priority, right, on our streets and roads. Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. And then we are in the public space. And if we were to discuss that, in this book, the author claims that the public space and the city is mainly designed for men. Is there any other examples that we could lift that where these questions have been considered? I'm thinking, Jannica, if you could join in there.
So,
yes, now you're in.
Yeah, thank you. So in the background, we can actually see one of the projects that sort of relate to this, which is an Okidoki project, and it's a school project in Rinkeby. It's a suburb to Stockholm. And Rinkeby is basically a community within the community. So it has a lot of difficulties when it comes to the public spaces and who is supposed to inhabit this one. And we were invited to do a project here where we decided on that the modular of the 21st century is actually a 12-year-old girl. It's not a measurement, it's actually about diversity overall, as we have talked about earlier. And we also decided on the fact to have a feministic approach to our proposal. Because this is a part of the society, in the society that is basically all the public spaces are owned by men. So we decided to plan and design things to turn the tables and see what happened. So we started off by designing the square pink, not because girls like pink, but because it's of interest to see what happens when the dominant occupants of space are forced to be in a place, in a context that is associated with the oppressed part, the women who were pushed out of the context, so to speak. And we also decided on, when we talk about public transport and also cars, we know that cars are by 70% in Sweden owned by male, and a car occupies about 25 square meters of the outdoor environment. So we decided to replace the parking lot with a team gym practice hall. Team gym practice is a sport with a female dominance of 90%. And just like other female dominant sports, they are poorly funded. And the shortcoming of that, of course, has created a lack of halls and practicing facilities all over Stockholm. So by placing this hall here, we not only created a room for girls to move, but we also created a movement and a presence of other socioeconomic groups in the public space of Rinkeby. And this was a competition that we won. And it was very interesting also how CSAB, Skolfastigheter in Stockholm, had placed the competition in order to solve questions of sustainability. And it was also interesting to take a moral stand in sustainability questions and to perhaps become the architect, not only solving the form, but also taking a stand.
Thank you. Angela, would you like to join the conversation too? Do you have any thoughts on this?
Can you hear me there okay?
I can hear you, and I hope to see you in a minute.
Okay.
Yeah, there you are. Lovely.
Good. Yeah, I think this is a really interesting, post-COVID in particular, planning public spaces. And I think we've had time to think now as well. One example I could give you is where I sit on, I chair one of the Croydon Design Review panel, and it's all about place. And one thing that came up for a huge big square that they're designing in the very centre of Croydon in southeast London, that the space was designed by a couple of firms, architects, landscapers, and all of that. And then we come in and we do a crit of it, and we say, well, who did you ask? Who did you ask about what you're going to put in the square, whether it be a children's playground, or whether it be the kiosks or the place for this, that, and the other. And so they said, oh, well, we didn't really get around to doing the community consultation yet. So they had to go away and come back. And then after asking all of the diverse groups that live there, they came back with a completely different idea, or added value, I should say, because they asked the people that are going to use the square about things like ease of travel with a pram or your bicycle, or safe areas to sit, or place for elders to sit they're not going to be knocked over by a ball or something like that. But it's really, our big thing is community consultation. And without community consultation, we're only assuming we know. And I think it's an arrogant thing for anybody to think they know best. You have to ask. And community consultation is very much the way forward. And anything to do with where public are going to be using spaces or for public buildings, but even for housing, for co-housing, for mixed housing, for different use space, you've got to keep asking people, because people change, over time. And I think it's been a long time really since there's been that kind of grassroots community voice coming up, and then top-down listening. And I think we're just about coming to that now, where places will be better for it.
One of the questions we have discussed previously is in our pre-meeting was the security aspects of the public space and the security issues then primarily for women. Helena, do you want to expand that question, please?
Sure, I can start on that one.
Yes.
So yes, we did discuss sort of the security aspect as you mentioned, and also would there be a need to design specific spaces for men in regards to this? And in general, I would actually say no. I think that, not at least in the public space, because I think, there might be a certain need over, something very specific, which means that we have to do this. But in general, I would say no, because if we start doing that, I think we have really sort of failed as a society, when it comes to the structural gender inequality of our society. We've sort of accepted that and then working with solutions on top of that. So I think we need to sort of work from the right angle here, really, and start with that. And then one could, of course, work with sort of safe zones or elaborate sort of around this, like the example from you, Janica, where you presented how you worked with this area. I think that's really, you know, twisting things around, but then again, sort of in general, I think it's a big no to that one. And then also the example from you, and we heard it from the other panelists earlier,